Okay, so let's copy that HTML, and also there is some CSS that is with it. I'm going to create two folders called test HTML and test.css in this folder that I have here. I am in a folder called inside unit 2, CSS position displays the index, and here I created two files. You can ignore the other stuff that I have here. I have two folders, lab and sorting. But for now, we're going to be focusing on a test HTML and a test CSS file. You can call those whatever you want as long as you know where they are. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to open those with code. And here, I'm just going to paste my HTML. Also, I should have this so that people can see where my mouse is. I'm going to paste that. Actually, I'm not going to copy the CSS. We're going to just write the CSS. So there is this HTML file. I have to update here the value of the link for the CSS file. This is going to be test.css. So I'm going to change the title to CSS display position and the index. Not strictly necessary changes of the title, but we do need to link the correct CSS. Cool. Then the next thing is to open that HTML with the browser. This will open my default browser here. So I'm going to close this. Cool, so everyone has their HTML file. They opened it in the browser. Cool. So in here, we can see that in the HTML we have a few spans, elements. One is called first, another one we gave them a class first, second, third, and there are some, the first span has a tag, another class called outer container. We're going to use this for the purpose of this lesson. Then there is an inner span that has a class of inner container so that we can identify it. And all the others are just outer containers. So, cool. So what are we seeing on the screen? We're just seeing those spans. And why are they all in the same line? Somebody that can contribute. Why are they all the spans on the same line versus being separated in different lines? I mean, correct, because span is by default an inline element or an inline tag. That is, they do not create line breaks between them, and they do not occupy the entire all the available space. So the first thing that we want to do is make these spans. Actually, let's see here the default. So remember that for opening your developer tools, you could do right-click inspect or Command-Shift-C. Add some zoom here. Cool. So now here, let's just do this. I'm going to select my one span. And remember that here on the right side, or depending on how you have arranged your windows, you may not see this computed tab here. You may just see it under the box. But here I'm going to go to computed, and I want to see the default styles. So for that, once I have the computed, I have to enable this show all box here. This will allow me to see all the CSS properties that the browser by default is applying to this element. So I click on show all, and it shows me all the default properties. that are coming from the browser that I didn't specify, but because the browser applies certain styles to certain elements, they're still here and we can still inspect them. Was everyone able to find the computed properties where there are all the CSS properties? Cool, so now click in here filter, and I'm going to type in display because that's the property that I am interested in. And there you go, as we have this pan selected, we see that the display by default is inline. And it shows sort of grayed out because that means that is the browser the one that's applying that style. But here we can see the display inline. Cool, so okay, everyone make those spans with a CSS rule, selecting this pan tag, make them display block. So for doing that, I'm going to go to my CSS file. I can open my CSS file with terminal, or if you're using VS Code, you can do Command D to toggle this side panel here. And here I have my test CSS. So I'm going to target this span tag with this CSS rule. So I'm going to do span display, the display property, and I want them to display as block. I hide this thing so that I can make it half and half. So cool, I saved that and I refresh my page. Now there are block elements because we specify that property. They occupy their online, and their width will be all the available space that they have, which is the entire. Cool. So the next thing that we want to do is, well, actually, any questions to this point? Was everyone able to get to this point? Cool. So that's just one value that we specified for the display property. We're going to get to see a few more. So by default, we saw that an inline tag is, a span tag is by default inline. And so, okay, so we saw that. Now let's make every div a different color. So I'm going to do the first because we have a class on one of these spans that is first. I want to make that one, let's do background color yellow. Refresh, we get our background color yellow. Also, something that I forgot to mention is when we have this display, I'm commenting out the display block, and I'm refreshing the page, and I get this, all of them in one line. So it is said that the span tag is by default display inline in the normal flow. So it turns out that there are different flows, and we actually saw two of them already, which is flexbox flow and grid flow. So this is the normal flow when we don't have any of the flexbox or grid. And the normal flow is elements that are inline will be put next to each other, elements that are block elements put underneath each other, separating the lines. And for instance, we said that in flex flow, the elements are laid out sort of in a zigzag way, and in the grid, all the elements are, well, in the grid we have more control where we can have columns and rows, and we can even say where the elements are going. But this is, when we don't have any of that, we call that the normal flow. So so that if you see that in documentation, at least you have a frame of reference. Normal flow is the regular default way in which elements are placed into a document on display. So, cool. So by default, spans in normal flow are displayed inline. So if I put these span tags in a flexbox flow, and then I change the flexbox direction to be a column, it turns out that the spans no longer are inline; they become block elements. So that's something that you have to watch out for, where maybe some elements that you thought are inline, but if you have those elements inside a flexbox, and that flexbox is direction column, it turns out that they all become block elements. So that might throw us off a little bit, but actually, let me just demonstrate that real quick here. So here we just have our body. So I'm gonna grab the body. Oh, where am I? So note that these pans are indeed, let's just open this entirely. These pans here, if I go to the computer tab, and I show all, and I filter by display, I can see that they are inline by default. So we're going to see how this changes as I change the container element, that is the body, and we change the flow in which the elements are going to be laid out. So I'm going to do the body, and to the body I'm going to go to the Styles tab, and here I'm going to say display, flex, and we already see some changes. As I set the display flex in the body, we already see that there is some space that is being removed. Now let's look at flex direction. So, and then let's do column. So we see now, if you remember, once we saw flexbox, once we change the flex direction, which by default is row, to column, all the elements, because the align items property default value is stretch, all the elements occupy the entire available width. And now, if we go to the span, and we go back to the computed, and we see display, now this span, the same span that we had before, now is display block. We're not setting explicitly the span to be display block. In fact, let me just remove this in case there is any doubt. Refresh. Oh, then I lost the other stuff. Let me just add that. Display flex, flex direction, column. So now as we select the span, go to compute it, make sure that you have show all enable, and now we see that display is block. So this is something that at the beginning was like, it was really frustrating for me to sort of having to debug, oh, but if spans are inline, what's going on? I'm never saying this span should be block. So the thing is that with CSS rules, a lot of them interact with each other. So for instance here, display flex and flex direction column are interacting as to what those children become, whether an inline or a block element. So you just have to be aware of that, and then just like explore. Always check your assumptions, which is, I think a span is an inline element, but under certain circumstances, it might be a block. But I just want to verify whatever the value is, and I can do that in the computed tab in the browser. Cool. Okay, so now because we changed the flow of the document to be flex, now by default in a flex flow, spans are block, but in a normal flow, spans are inline. That's just the point that I wanted to make there. So let's refresh this, and we are back here. This is our HTML, our CSS so far. So we said let's make those block. Now they occupy in their own line. Now I want to make them all the same height and width. I'm going to do height 100 pixels, width 100 pixels. Actually, let me disable my extension. Cool. So height and width 100 pixels. I go back to my browser, refresh, and we got each one being 100 pixels wide and high. Also, I want to give the others some colors as well. So let's do first, second. I'm going to copy this background color. I'm just going to make this one blue. And the last one, just red. I think I have a third, yeah. Refresh, and then we got blue, yellow, blue, and red. Is everyone here with me? Cool. So another thing, just as we saw before, even though we said that a second was to be 100 pixels wide, because still a block element, the browser by default will just add margin. We can see that margin that is being added by the browser here. The browser, because the block element will create a line break before and after, the browser just adds that margin so that the line break actually is created. Cool. So, okay, so we saw block. We talked about block versus inline. I think we actually saw this one already, which is display none. What is this going to do? Experiment in your own copy. It will hide everything, even though they have some height and width and some colors. They're just hidden completely. And we see that. You may ask, like, are they removed from the DOM, or are they just removed from the visual part of the website? What do you think? Are they completely gone, like we cannot recover them, or maybe with JavaScript we can still grab them? So as we can see here, the elements are still in the document, right? These pans are I'm still able to select and see their CSS properties. They're just not being displayed currently, right? And if we go to the console and we do document.query selector, and then I grab, let's say, the third. If it's a class I need to put the dot, I can see that I am able to grab it, and I could even see this. I could access the style property of that element, and on top of that, access the background color. Oh, and this is not showing up the background color yellow because the background color was not set with JavaScript. It was set with CSS. But let's do something like the inner text. You can see that the inner text of that is third. So the element's still there. It's just hidden basically. Cool, so that's display none. That one is not very interesting. We already saw grid and flex, and those change the flow of the document. Cool, so now let's go, let's look at some of the positions. So basically that was the display part. Let's put this back to block. Any questions or comments, thoughts and ideas that we should discuss before we move on to the position property? At least one. Oh, we should color the inner. Let's color the inner container. I think we have an inner container class in our HTML. So we have an outer container and inner container. I want to color this one a different color. Background color. Same. Let's make this one green. Then we end up with this. So because the inner is inside of outer first, we see that in here. Let's see. Is the inner 50 pixels, or is it less than that? Thumbs up if you think it's 50 pixels. Thumbs down if you think it's less than 50 pixels. High, I mean, and yeah. It's more than, the inner element is more than 50 pixels? Or is it 50 pixels or less than 50 pixels? High. Thumbs up, yes. Thumbs down, no. So, maybe I didn't ask the question correctly. Let's just verify if we do right-click inspect. It's a hand. Okay. But is the inner 100 pixels tall? Okay, let's see. Let's select it. And then let's see here. We have 100 pixels, so it is actually 100 pixels. It looks like it's not, but it is. The outer first. Look at this one. The outer first is actually 102. They're overlapping, yes. So that's actually a great segue to what we're about to see. So it turns out that the outer first is 100. Yes, Addie?
This is not you pass it. When do we want to use display mode? Like, what's an example of how we want to use that?
That's a good question. So, yeah, maybe somebody can help us with an example. Have one. Let me show you one. One will be this one. Imagine this is a website and I can do this. I'm hiding that element. This one has an animation, right, which makes it nice. But let's say that the first version of this website probably didn't have that animation and it just displayed this left part, just displaying on. Right? Uh-huh.
So basically you can do like some others names.
Mm-hmm.
Or you want to hire social security number.
Okay, if you're a government website and you had to enter your social security number, well, I think that will be actually a special case because in that case you probably want the input where they put in their name, maybe to be where they're putting their social security number, maybe to be an input box that is typed password. I think that will be a slightly different example.
Basically,
other department, and log in all departments and send it, so basically you hide the
Like what kind of information would you send?
For example, there's like the name, address, and email, and there's social security numbers.
Okay.
So if you want to send it to another department and you don't want to show that there's social security numbers,
I see.
you hide it.
Yeah. So actually, that one example will be: imagine you have a government form, and you want to print that form, but you don't want your social security number to appear once you print it. You could have a CSS rule that checks whether the page is being displayed in the browser or if it's about to be printed. And if it's about to be printed, then you could hide it. Also, this is a good example. I was looking at 3D. Yeah, actually, that's a great example too. Like you could have your hangman made of squares, where each square is one body part, and then as the user is losing lives, then instead of they will start all like this, say display none, so nothing. You will see only the post basically, and then they are there. All the body parts will be there, but as the user is losing lives, then you change display none on those elements to be display block or display inline, and then they will pop up as if it was losing. So those are some examples. There is this example that I'm going to use across 3D or something 3D. No, maybe partition plane. Yes, this one, I think. This is another little example. We're actually going to see how to create this thing, but as I scroll down, see this thing appears here. So when I'm not there, it will be display none. But as I scroll down, it will be display inline or display. Actually, we're going to see position. We're going to see how we can put this in there. Let's see actually if we inspect this. Can we see it changing from one to the other? So let's look at it. We have, okay, let's see. So it seems that this element is currently display block. I'm gonna scroll up. Oh, that's cool. Now it's display none. So it's actually as I imagine it to be. So look at the element here. Is this back to top class, and is this element here? Currently it's display block. As I scroll up, you will see the display here change. Now it changed to none. And in fact, now if I highlight here, well, there's no word it being highlighted because the display none property is in effect. So that's another cool example. As I scroll down, then it becomes display block again. There seems to be some intermediate states, like here. Opacity and how they create that. I don't know what you will call that effect. Right, but would that be like evaporating? No, isn't it? Fading. Yes, that's the name. That's cool. Okay, so yeah, those will be some examples of display none. Any other comments or ideas that we should explore? Cool. So actually, let's learn how to put this box here so that it's static, and maybe this navbar here so that as we scroll, it's always there. So for that, we're going to be using the position property. Right. So let me see something here. Let's put our HTML. So we get this, and we see that. So we were discussing that the inner div is overlapping, right? And hopefully by the end of this lecture, we will see like why is it that it appears that it's not 50, but if we look carefully, we can see that some part is going above what we will think is above the second element, right? In fact, it's going behind the second element because that we see that this area here. Do we have? Oh, we don't have the clicker here. That's too high. We can see that this area here, above the where it says second, is not green. So that means that that green must be going behind the second div, right? Okay, so that means that we have the possibility, and we're going to get to explore by the end, we have the possibility of saying, I want this to be on top of that, or this to be behind something else. But before we jump into that, I need to make some edits to the CSS. So I actually want this to be applied to the outer container class, which are all of them but the inner one. So instead of this pan, I want to select all the elements that have the outer container class, and apply the display block and height to 100. So let's go here, refresh the page, and we get this. Right, why do we get this inner here? Why are we seeing this inner green on the top right corner of the yellow one? Douglas?
Is it because the span display is inline by default, so it's going to span is inline?
Correct, that's it. All of the others, because they have the class outer container, they're all spans, which by default are inline, but I'm changing them here to be block. And the only one that I'm not changing is that one, there. So, but I want that one to also be block. So I'm going to grab it by the class, which is inner container. I'm going to say display block. I want it to be block. I just don't want it to be 100 pixels tall. So, and then I get this. I set display block on the inner container, and I get this. So again, this is another idea where we see that the yellow one, or the green one, is on top of the yellow one. Right? So as if they were stacking together underneath, we have the yellow one, and on the top, the green one. Cool. Okay, so let's look at the, yes, Hugo.
So that each element you add in the stacks on top of it is going to like the one, like you see how the chapter inner container at the bottom, it will stack on whatever comes before.
Correct. So elements in HTML, we can control that stacking order, which is what the last piece that we're going to learn today. But if you don't control the stacking order, what happens is the last element will be at the top of the stack if they are overlapping. So we saw how second, which comes after first, will be at the top, hiding some content from the inner once we had the inner to be 100 pixels. So they will stack. If all of these were on the same position, we will only see the third one because all the others will be behind it. So they stack in the same order as the HTML is, from top to bottom. Well, in reverse order from the HTML. So the element that's at the bottom that is last will be first appear as first if they are overlapping. Okay, so let's look at this property, the next property that we're going to learn, which is the position property. So it turns out, but like all the other properties, all elements have a default position property. So let's look at that first. I'm going to right-click inspect on the outer first, make this big, and then we have that. Now go to computed. In my HTML, in my CSS, I'm never saying the position property. I just want to see the default. So I go to the computed tab. Make sure you have show all, and then here I'm going to say position. Position. Cool. So there are a bunch of properties that have the word position on it, but the one I'm interested in is this one. Position is static. So we see that there are some properties: background position, list style position, object position, but I only want the one that says just position, plain position, and the value by default we can see that is static. Let me add some zoom here. So we can see here the position property by default is something called static. So this is similar to all the stuff we have seen that comes by default with the browser. And then what this position means is that in the normal flow, the elements will not overlap, and they will be, basically that's the baseline. The elements will not overlap unless one is bigger than the other and is overflowing. And the elements will be placed in this order, which is the first HTML element go first, the second one go second, and the third one go third. So that's what basically position static means. But since that one is the default, it's not very interesting. But let's look at something. Let's change that value to be something else. So I'm going to go to. Actually, let's play with it here. I'm going to select the outer container first. I'm going to go to styles, and here, or maybe here, I'm going to specify position. And we have all these values for the position. So for instance, we select static because that's the default, we don't see any changes. Now let's look at position relative. And this is not the default. We saw that the default is static. We still don't see any changes going on. But just like we use, when we're talking about grids, just like when we use grid template columns, we have to say display grid. Similarly, when we're doing position relative or the others that we're going to see, there are some properties that are, you could think of them as being enabled by the element being in a position relative. So those other properties are top, left, right, and bottom. So let's look at top, for instance. Again, let's look at the documentation for top CSS, top CSS property. Set the top edge of the position div element 50 pixels down from the top edge of its nearest position ancestor. The top property affects the vertical position of a position element. This property has no effect on non-position elements. Actually, this is good that I visited this. So we call an element positioned if the position property is other than static. So position relative, position absolute, and position fixed, which we're going to get to see in a moment, are all position elements. We're specifying what kind of positioning we want to do on them. If the position is static, we call that a non-position element. And then, okay, so first the vertical position of the position element. So, okay, let's look at what that does. Going back here, we have position relative. Now let's try top. Let's do 50 pixels. So what do we see? There's actually a couple of things down. What happened? Who can describe what just happened here? Char?
Is move the first container like 50 pixels down and getting control of the blue.
Correct. So there's two things happening. It made the first element go down 50 pixels, and it made the yellow go over the blue. Where before we saw that some of the green one was going under the blue, but in this case, then it made it pop up. So it turns out that once we set a position in an element, once we position that element, it is set the element is out of the normal flow, and now there's some other rules that apply to it, which is they will be. This will make sense once we see the z index, which allows to control where it is going. So, is that a question?
Yeah, question.
Sure.
So when trees auto, because I know it's like auto, I don't see it doing anything, but when does it affect?
You're talking about like the position auto.
Or even like top auto or bottom auto?
You most likely use it. One example that we saw was when we were doing grid, when we wanted, let's say, 2 columns on the sides to be 100 pixels, and in the middle, we want one column to be automatic width. That's one example. Another example is you can center images by making the image a block element and then setting their left and right margins to be automatic, and then the image becomes centered. That's another example. So here, let's do position 50 pixels. Let's do 25 pixels. Oh, position has to be relative. So we saw that. Now, on your CSS, instead of having the outer first container be position relative and top 25 pixels, change it so that is the second the second element, which is the blue one. Make the blue one be position relative and top 25 pixels. Cool. What did somebody wants to share what they find? What did they find? little bit louder. There is some space appearing between the first and the second one. Let's look at that. So go to the second one. Let's say position relative top 20 pixels. Save. Let's refresh. And we see now a gap being formed between the first one and the second one. But what else happened? Yes, Douglas.
Push it to the top of the stack. It's not like it.
Well-
I would say it, but it's now it's out of. Oh, you said.
So that's correct. It is, since we. So what this is called. This element is creating a stacking context. That is, this element. Now all the elements that I put inside of the second one will be at the top, right? And here the second div, now because it's moved 20 pixels down, is going over and is it appears to be another way to think about this. This second element is somewhat closer to me, to the viewer of this website, right? And the red one is farther away from me, so that we get this overlapping. Cool. So we see that top. So there's a few things to note about the position relative. One is the space that where the element would go is kept. So in fact, if I remove this, let's make this big. Let's put this to the right side. Selecting this pan. Now I'm going to increase this by maybe even 180 pixels. So we can see that the space where the element would go is capped. So that's one thing to note about the position relative. The space where it would go is capped. And also, this top property value is relative to the position where the element would go. So these 210 pixels are from the end of the blue one all the way to the bottom at the beginning of the end of the yellow one to the beginning of the blue one. So the distance between where the yellow one ends and the blue one begins is 210 pixels. So that's why it's called also relative.
So it's not the space between the two, the top, it's the actual entire area.
You said it's not the space between the two?
Because you said it's from the bottom of the yellow to the bottom of the red.
Correct.
So the top is not like the blank space in between.
I think I'm confused. So here, let's look at this. Let me save this. Put it in here. Actually, just 1, 2, 10. Save, refresh. So we still have it in the same position. I want to show you this in Firefox. I used to be more of a Firefox user. And this, what I like about it is that Firefox has built in a ruler that you can use to measure stuff. In Chrome, you have to install like some of these extensions, and it will allow me to like measure stuff. But for some reason, which I couldn't find out before this lesson, is they don't work on our simple pages, which I don't know why. But anyway. Let me just show you in here. I'm going to paste the URL, and I have that page, right? Now here I want to measure. The developer tool is open with the same shortcuts. I'm going to put it to the right. And here, if I go to, I already have it enabled, but just so that you see, in here in settings, I have measure a portion of the page. So this toggle gives me this little tool here. And then this tool here, I could use to measure from here to here. And there should be around, so we can see that there is around 412, like, let's zoom in. So from here to here, there is around 212 pixels. So that's about right. I'm just like missing maybe one pixel here and then the other one at the top. But yeah, does that clarify your question, Peter? Where the space is? So those 210 pixels are relative to the position where the element would go. The element, if we didn't position it, it will go in this place here, after the yellow one. But because we position it relative, and then we say top 210 pixels, it end up at the bottom here. Yes?
So we'll leave at the top at like 50 pixels before, and the thing itself is 100 pixels.
Mm-hmm.
Past that. Like what is now 25 pixels?
So let's put it back. Let's put this one back. Wait, it's the second one. So you said that the top was 25 pixels?
Yeah.
And the element itself is 100 pixels. And then if we measure this distance from here to here, we get around 25 pixels. Here. 25 pixels tall. The element will still be 100 pixels. It's just that it will overlap the other element. It's over on top of the red one.
So if the top is bigger than the actual element, you'll put the element inside the top.
If the top is larger than the actual element, you'll put the element inside the top. I think I don't understand that statement.
So when you had that 210 before, the blue bar was inside the 210 pixels.
Oh, no, it was not inside of the 210 pixels. It was right after the 210 pixels. In here, still, the element is after the 25 pixels that we left of space at the top. Yes.
So what happens to those inner?
So you mean if we position relatively the inner one? That's a good question. So let me just go back to Chrome. Let me quit this. Remove the position relative from the first one. Actually, let's just do it here in the browser, so I don't have to save and refresh. So the question is, what would happen to if we select the inner container, this, and we give it a position relative and top? Let's give it a top and a right, 25 pixels. Let's do right, another 25 pixels. So remember that we have top, bottom, right, and left. That allows to control where the element will be. And this here is 25 pixels from the top where it would be, and 25 pixels from the right where it would be. So that is from this corner, from this corner of the green element to the border of the yellow element, we have 25 pixels. But do we have 25 pixels from the top here of the green one to the top of the yellow one? We don't. We have more than 25 pixels. But the reason is then why?
Is it because it's making room for the content? Within, it's starting from 25 below the outer, the bounding box without first.
Say that again?
That the position top
Mm-hmm.
it starts 25 pixels below the content box of the yellow square.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. I think if I understood correctly, if the inner container is not positioned, it will go here, right? This is where it will go. Now, if we actually, and you can also see another thing here, which is if position is static, top and right, they don't have any effect. So top and right will work with all the others, but not with position static. They don't take any effect. So this is where that green square will go. But once we do position relative, is 25 pixels from the top where it would go, which is like right in this space. So if I understood correctly what you were saying, Douglas, is this content box is 28 pixels high. Now, if we did the math, or if we could measure it in, let's just measure it in Firefox. From the bottom of that content box of the first yellow box, but I will need to make it the inner container, this not display, position, relative, top 25 pixels, right 25 pixels. I got that. Now let's look at that on Firefox. We get this. Now if we measure here, we should find that the measurement, let's measure from here to here. So there seems to be around 27 pixels. So that's just probably because I'm just like missing by 2 pixels here. Yeah, you can see the overlapping here. If I do, well, I cannot leave this one selected, but that box where this text is around, in this case, in Firefox, is 16.25 pixels. Right? And I measure about from where the green box starts to where that outer first text box is, and it's around 25 pixels, the one that is specified. Does that make sense? So that's why the position is called relative, because it's relative to where the element will go. Cool. Let's just make sure. Let's actually look at the documentation. Position, just to make sure that I'm not missing any important point. Oh, also, but this one is. So this is another way to word this. A relatively positioned element is an element whose computed position value is relative. The top and bottom property specify the vertical offset from its normal position. The left and right properties specify the horizontal offset. And the key here is from its normal position. We're going to see how there are others that are not from their normal position. Any comments or questions? Yes?
Can you position negatively, or would you just want to position them the mirror opposite?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Basically, another way to say that will be, can the value for top and bottom or left and right be negative? Let's try it here. Let's try top minus 10 pixels. So we can see that now that green box is over the text, and we could keep going until it disappears. And even if I try to scroll, it will not appear. So yes, you could do negative values for top and bottom, left or right. In fact, we can also see that because we say 25 pixels on the right, even though it's a positive number, that number is from this edge in the yellow square to this edge on the green square. And it pushes the element outside and where we cannot see it anymore. Other questions or comments on position relative? Let's take a 5-minute break and we'll see the others.
I like the pressure.
He won't stop. When I start reading
Cool, so let's look at another value for the position property. That other value is absolute. So let's change what we had here. Let's first play with the first one. I'm gonna remove this from here. So we have this, we're back to the starting point. Now I want to change the first element. The first element, I want it to be position absolute and top 50 pixels. So this is what it looks like by default, not setting any position. So now I'm setting position absolute and top 50. What do we see? Make sure you're able to replicate this. Cameron.
I mean, absolutely is making it so it's set to the first pixels that start from the top up of the screen.
Mm-hmm. That's close. It is not. There is. It will be, the element will be position absolute relative to the. Wait, there is a wording that I'm missing here. The element is position absolute relative to the first position non-static ancestor. So it turns out that here we're gonna get to explore that like next. Yeah. Hupa, do you have a question? Cool. So what do we see here, like compared to position relative? There's two things that are going on. Let's actually make it go to the right, to the left. Let's add some space to the left. Let's do another 25 pixels here, so we can appreciate more. So, what's going on here? Alexander? Whatever you think. Doesn't have to be right.
It's like positioning itself compared to the first.
Its position, it appears to be positioned in itself 50 pixels from the first, or from the top, right?
Yeah.
And what else?
And then 25 pixels from the left.
Correct. And then something else. Hugo?
Well, I'm just thinking about it more in like art terms. It's kind of putting it on its own layer to move everything else up to the top.
So that's the next thing that we see, that the space where the element would be is not there anymore. When we have position relative, the space where the element will just be blank space available there. But now here, the element was completely removed out of the normal flow, and it now exists as, you can imagine, as existing floating on top of the rest of the content. In fact, like in here at this point, it doesn't matter how I change the height of the blue element. That will not affect the position absolute element, because it's completely outside of the normal flow on top of everything else. So three things. One is, it seems to have been put 50 pixels from the top, is removed from the normal flow, which is no space is left, where the place where the element would go is just completely removed. And what was the third point? I forgot the third point. Who can help me with the third point? Peter?
It kind of puts it closer to the user.
Correct.
Like, I guess absolute is the absolute first thing.
Correct, and it's lift up to closer to the user. We can think of it that way. Cool. So yes, Cameron.
It doesn't seem to come before a relative. Like it doesn't seem to stack on top of it.
It doesn't seem to stack on top of relative. That's because you tried it with a relative, and then
there's a relative is I guess above absolute.
So it turns out that they're all, now is when the z-index property kicks in, and they're all the same one. So they will be laid out as if in the order in which they appear in the HTML. So let's look at here. Let's look at this contrast. When we say absolute, let's change it from absolute to relative. We can see it change. So once we have relative, see that the element is moved relative to where the element will be, which is right here at the top.
Yes.
It's put 50 pixels down and 50 pixels from the 25 pixels from the left, and we get this. And we can see that the space where the element will be is still there. Right, so let's do absolute again. The element was completely removed, and now is 50 pixels from the top and 25 pixels from the left, on top of everything else. Yes, Peter?
So if you got rid of like the top and the left, would it just completely make it?
That's a good question. If we remove the top, that's what we get. It's on top of the other, but it's 25 pixels from the left. And if we remove left, it's right there. So which is on top of the blue one. It's on top of the first one. Right? The second one is still there. It's just underneath. You can see it as I hover over here. It's just that the first one is over the second one. Giselle?
Yeah,
it removes the space, and it seems, and I'm saying it seems because we're gonna see next why. So it seems that it's putting the element 50 pixels from the absolute top, basically, which is like the top of the page where the second one starts, and then it puts it on top of everything else. So those are the 3 points. Okay, so note that I was saying it seems that it's putting it from the absolute top, that is from where basically the top of the body is. But it turns out that the definition says the following. The element is positioned relative to its first position non-static ancestor element. So let's see what that means. Well, this is confusing because this is called relative, and then this is absolute. The element is position relative according to the first position ancestor element. The thing is here that this relative means relative to the normal position where it would go. Right? So let's look at what this means, like position relative to its first position non-static ancestor element. So we have this. I just refreshed. We lost that position relative that I had set on the first one. And here, what I want to do is I want to set the position relative on the inner, actually. So let's do I selected the inner container. I'm going to say position absolute top. Oh, that's something interesting. Look at that. By selecting position absolute, we already see something changing, which is something I was not expecting. What seems to be changing? Suzanne? It's not a block element anymore. So let's verify that. If we go compute it, this play, oh, it seems that it's still block. But let's see if we do here. This is really confusing. So it's still block, but it's not occupying the entire width of the element. Let's do, so this must have an explanation if we go in here. So let's read this. Okay, this seems to be saying something about it. Most of the time, absolutely positioned elements that have a height and a width set to auto are sized as to fit their content. So this is an important note here, because we absolutely position that element. Now it's still a block, but there's something else that changes, which is if their height and width is auto, which is the default. If their height and width is auto, which is the default, they are sized as to fit their content. So we just need to remember that if an element is, we want it to occupy the entire available space, and we'll have to be careful if we want that element to be position absolute, because it will be once the element becomes position absolute, the element will be sized as to fit their content, even though it's a block element. So that's sort of an edge case in CSS that we'll have to watch out for. I wonder if we do like with 100%. Oh, that's interesting. We set that width to be 100%, and it seems to be 100% relative to the body, actually, not the container, which is outer first, but from the body. So let's just make, for now, let's just make this 100 pixels. Oh, something we could do maybe is we do with inherit. We hadn't seen inherit as a value for a property. This is a good one. We're saying inner container, please inherit the width from your parent. And the width of the parent is 100 pixels. Therefore, the child becomes 100 pixels. It's inheriting that property, that value. So that will be a good fix if we have this problem. But the point for this is that we can say here, top, or are you following along with me at this point? Okay, set top to be equal to 0. Top in the inner container. So we set it to 0, and now it's on top of the text in the first outer container, right? Now let's set it, instead of being 0, let's set it to, let's say, 10 pixels. That's a little bit too small. Let's do like here, 20 pixels. So it's being positioned 20 pixels from the top. Now what I want to demonstrate here is that the element is positioned relative to the position, relative to the first position ancestor. So in here we have the inner container is a position element, and its ancestor, which is the first outer container, is not being positioned. It's a non-position element. Or in other words, another way to say it is an element whose position value is static, right? Now let's look at what happens if we set the first outer container position to be relative. So I'm changing the parent here, and we can see that the element is being moved down a little bit. That is because before, when, or like at this point where the parent, which is first, is not a position element, this inner container is being positioned relative to the body, actually, not to its parent, because the parent is not a position element. Its position properties value is static. So in here, if we were to measure this, so I'm gonna copy this to save it to my CSS. This is the inner position that. Say that. refresh this just to make sure that we have the same thing. Now let's go to Firefox. Let me copy this. Firefox. Let's use our measuring tool. So here, let's look at this and let's measure from here to the top. You can see that from there to the absolute top, we have that age of 20. Can you guys see that number? There. So we see that the space between the top of the page, the body, is 20 pixels. Right? But once I make the parent of this inner box, I make the parent be a position element, then the element will be absolutely positioned relative to its position ancestor. In that case, let's look at what we get. So first outer container, and I'm going to give the first outer container a position relative. And we can see that the element is being lowered down. Our inner is being lowered down. It's now because the 20 pixels that we set from the top now is 20 pixels from the top of the position ancestor, which is the first element. So now, if we measure again, we should have about 20 pixels here. So we got exactly 20 pixels. See, 20 pixels from the top of the position ancestor. So that's something also sort of tricky where when you're positioning elements, you want to remember that if you position absolute, those values for top, right, left, and bottom are relative to the position ancestor. And if the ancestor is not positioned, then it will look up the DOM tree and it will look until it finds a parent that is positioned. And if an ancestor, if it doesn't find any ancestor that's positioned, it will just position it relative to the body. Questions or comments on this point? Yes?
So if the inner span was inside the second, and you positioned it to 0 while it was absolute, would it still fly to the top and bottom?
That's a good point. Let's look at that one. I really like that one. So Douglas' point is, what if inner is in the second, in the blue box, and we say position absolute, we say top 0. So let's do that by moving this HTML. I'm going to move this from here to the second. Save that, refresh this, and we have that nothing appears to have changed, but we can see now that this pan is inside the second one, and the top is 20 pixels. So it's 20 pixels not from the relative to the ancestor, because the ancestor is not positioned, but relative to the body, which is the ancestor of them all. But if I make the second be a position element by just saying position relative, now it comes back down. And now it's 20 pixels relative from its position ancestor. Does that make sense? Other questions or comments? So position ancestor in here. For making an element position, I just need to say position anything else that's not relative, that's not static. Sorry. That if I want the element to still be in its own place, I don't specify any top, left, or bottom, or right, and it will still be there. but that creates a position ancestor that might help me position its children relative to it. Cool. Any other questions? So what are some of the difference between position relative versus position absolute? There are two that I remember. Would I need to call on one at random? Peter? Absolute puts it in the foreground. Okay. Relative does that, I think, too. Like if we do here, the inner one is in the foreground because if we see it's on top of the second one. And even if I put it relative, it will still be on top of the second one. So both put the elements in the foreground. Even though that was not one of the ones we were looking for, that was a valuable point to make. Other like that. Yes, Jan. Mm-hmm. Correct. So with position relative, the space where the element would go is preserved. And if you put the element somewhere else, that space that you left will still be preserved. Correct. Not because of the parent. It will just be preserved regardless. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I mean that that's a good question. Here, if I position relative the second element, position relative, and then I say top 100 pixels, and then left 100 pixels. We can see that this space where the second one will go is preserved. You see that there's space between them. But if I make the second one absolute, the space is not preserved. Look at it go. The space was just removed. The element was completely janked out of the page and put on top of everything else. Other questions, comments? Make sure that you clear your doubts. This is a place for taking intellectual risks. Yes, Giselle.
So, relative positions an element based on the document's body and absolute basically on an ancestor, and if there is no ancestor, then it basically.
So yes, you got the absolute correct. The relative is relative to the position where the element would normally go. Mm-hmm. So here, if we do, this is the position where the second element will go is this, right? Because it's not being positioned. So once I say position relative, and I hit top 100, or let's do, actually let's not do top, let's just do left. The element is positioned relative to where the element will normally go. Mm-hmm. Yes, Cameron?
Top left, right doesn't work if you don't have position in there.
Correct. So if top, left, right, and bottom, they don't work if you don't have position. Because by default, the position value will be static, and top, bottom, left, and right have no effect on a statically positioned element. In fact, an element whose position is static, we call a non-position element. Let's take a 5-minute break. Let's come in for the last one.
It's not.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get CSS. You're on the reject query. So you can say this reject query that is position. So, yeah, cool. So I just had an idea. I was thinking that since these people that are here are in orientation night, which you all had, I met a lot of you on that day. I was thinking, should we go on network? So,
It would be nice to them. I don't think, can we get people to say hi to us? I'm sorry.
that's
But
true.
it would be
That's
nice
true.
for them- But it would be nice for them to say that. I don't really cut out of my instructions. I'm actually but at the same token, it would have been nice to people in the classroom. Oh, they so focused. They got it. They can't look at us and say hi.
That's fair. But
It would be nice for them. I would be
so I think you actually have a lot to offer. But let's do. Oh, also, yeah, that's another benefit. There is some food out there, so let's do. Okay, let's go. Make sure you meet at least someone. Let's do. What time is it? Let's do until 9. Until 9. Make sure you network. Just talk to somebody. And
I have a question, please, about
Sure.
the assessment,
Uh-huh.
Twitter thing. The footers supposed to be links?
they don't have to be. They just have to look like the same, but they don't have to be
They
actual
have to be
links.
links.
Mhm.
Okay. Just if I put them just li and make a hover
Yeah,
over
yeah, yeah.
through
Mhm. That's good. Yeah.
Yes, so.
I kind of wanted to avoid that.
listening. So introvert version of introvert. Perfect timing, right?
Depends. Like even with even if you use like
How you saying something out there? Yeah, that's my group. And I was done.
Okay. How did that go? It was good? Cool. I'm glad. I'm really glad. You got some food and you meet people new. Like, don't you think, like, something, I remember something that I used to think was like, oh, they're about to start where I did, like, what I did once. And, you know, also, like, you now have a better sense of what this is like, right? Just imagining, oh, they don't. But you know, like maybe we started it. Maybe after this, that would be cool. Imagine if 6.2 is known for starting the inner core. So that will be pioneers. Cool. That's true. Cool. So we just need to see two more things before we can do some exercises. And those are, so another value for the position property. So we saw relative and we saw absolute. We saw statics, that doesn't do much. Let's look at the last one, which is fixed. So let's read this. The element is positioned relative to the browser window. And then it says some examples to see. So relative to the browser window, let's look at what that means. So let's go in here. Let's refresh this. Now instead of having the inner be position absolute, which is what we had before, I'm going to change it to be fixed. And then, let me just show you the CSS so that we're in the same page. I'm going to remove this position absolute from the inner container. Let's see what else do I have. So, okay, so let's do in here, let's do this position fixed. Let's just do it like that. Position fixed without top, bottom, left, or right. Save that. Now we refresh the page. And we get this, which is interesting. So we have, because the inner is in the inner, we moved the inner box to be inside of the second, the blue element. And we see that position fixed position fixed is making the element not have the entire width. So the element is being janked out of the document. But let's try to do a top of 10 pixels. And now the element jumped to the top. Let's look at how it's jumping. And then it says that it's being positioned relative to the browser window, or also known as the viewport. So what does that mean? That means that if we scroll down, I'm going to add a little bit of zoom. And as I scroll down, the inner element is fixed there.
So fixed looks like that.
Fixed makes it like this. So the element gets positioned relative to the viewport, that is to the browser window. So if I say like top 0, I get it to be always at the top. Now, what if you try, instead of top, try bottom 0? Position fixed, bottom 0. So let's change it here. Bottom 0. Now it's fixed at the bottom. What if we want to put it on the top right corner? And even if we were to scroll sideways, but we don't have a way. We can make it scroll sideways, but how can we put it here? On the top right corner. Top 0. Right 0. So it will always be there. Let's see if we can make it so that we scroll sideways and see how it stays. Maybe if I add a p tag here. Oh, actually, I don't think. Would it? So let's see if it's stuck there. So it will be stuck there. So as I move this, it also moves. So what would be a good example for using position fixed? Dante? The really annoying ads online, yep. Where they pop up and then they're you scroll around and they don't disappear. Yes, you will. A search bar. Actually, an example, I think Ari showed us this example, the Gothamist.com. They have this nav bar here. When I scroll down, it stays there. See how it's sort of stuck at the top of the browser. In fact, let's inspect this. Let's see if it is actually being changed. So let's inspect. So it seems that is this div. Let's see what kind of position it has. Let's just make sure that there is nothing else. Div. Position fixed. So now let's scroll up. Let's see if that changes. Now the position is relative. But as I scroll down, note here how this changed. Oh, now it changed. Now it's position fixed. We can see it maybe more clearly if we have it in here on the computed properties. Show all filter position. So we can see position fixed down here. And as we scroll up, it changes to relative. So that's another good example. That nav bar there. Also, this example has one, which is here. As I scroll down, two things are being position fixed. That is this bar at the top here that says we encourage you to view our updated policy and cookies. And I hit click OK, thanks, and this sort of add analytics master online. If we inspect, we should see image body, maybe not that one. This one maybe. Let's look at here, position. Position is relative, actually. Maybe I'm not selecting the... Maybe it's this one. Oh, it's this one. I was selecting the wrong element. So this is the add, and then we can see that the position is fixed. So what do you think what happens when we click, or what would be a way in which we can click this X and make it disappear? People? Display none. So let's keep it. Let's see if that actually happens. I don't know. So I have the element highlighted here. Now I'm going to click the X, and now the position is still there. Oh, but now it was probably the display. Yep. So it changed the display once I click X. The display is now. What if I change it? Can I put it back? If I want it here, display block. Oh, there you go. You can bring it back. I don't know why you would want that, but that animation is cool though. You see the animation? I don't know how to make the animation, but it will be cool to learn. I know that it's CSS too. Cool, and then there's another animation when I click X. Oh, this is cool. Now it's broken because I clicked it once, and probably they removed the event listener in the X, and then now I cannot eliminate it. Cool. So that's position fixed. Fix is relative to the viewport. Let's look at it here. Position fixed CSS. Let's look at this. Fixed, position static, fixed. See, all of this is in the documentation. We're not making stuff up. So if you want to deepen your knowledge, cover the holes that we inevitably leave here due to time constraints, you are encouraged and should read the documentation. So position fix. An element with position fix is position relative to the viewport, which means it always stays on the same place, even if the page is scrolled. The top, right, bottom, and left properties are used to position the element. A fixed element does not leave a gap in the page where it would normally have been located. Notice the fixed element in the browser right corner of the page. Here's the CSS that was used. So as an example, they put this div here. And that doesn't matter where we are in the page. It will always be stuck there, since it's position fixed. There is another one which we're not gonna get to cover here, which is sticky. An element with position sticky is position based on the user's scroll position. A sticky element toggles between relative and fixed, depending on the scroll position. It is position relative until, yeah, but this is, you're encouraged to explore that one. Oh, that is cool. So we can see this one, that it will be sticky once we scroll down. This is basically how the Gothamist will work. Once you start scrolling down, it becomes fixed, but before that, it's position relative. So you're free to explore that. Cool, so questions or comments on position fixed? You know, I had a question which I didn't get to cover. I didn't get to see the answer before coming to class, which is, what happens if the top is greater than the bottom, or if the left is greater than the right. So since I didn't get to cover that before coming to class, let's just experiment it here. So we have this position fixed. It doesn't really matter the position, but what happens if we do top? Let's do left 10 pixels. So we can see that the element was moved from the left 10 pixels. And I want to do like bottom or right, maybe it's 0 pixels. Or let's do another 10 pixels. Oh, that's interesting. So I now said left be separated from the left 10 pixels and also be separated from the right 10 pixels. But so I guess the question is, so it seems that the element would just stretch to meet those two, to meet the separation from the left and from the right. And then the question is, what happens if this one is greater than the right? So let's do like 100 pixels here, or let's make it go out of the page with 200. So it's just, maybe if I make it smaller by zooming in, I can see it. Oh. And what if this one is like 100 pixels? So it seems that they will. Let's see what happens here. Oh. The element, or at least the background, seems just to disappear. So we can see that this is something that I didn't know, which is top, left, right, and top, bottom, left, and right can also control the size of the box. I thought they only control the position, but we can make the box, we can see it here. You can see this number changing here, which is, this is the size of the content box, the innermost box. It's 18 pixels, and we can see it changing as I change this property by doing shift up and down, which is interesting. And then if there is not enough space, the content of the box, which is the text inner, just overflows the box as a whole. So how can we summarize this? What if we do, let's do top 100 pixels, bottom 100 pixels. So now this box is 100 pixels from the top, but also 100 pixels from the bottom. And we can see that the box, the content box, is being affected by the size of that. It just becomes larger. So, questions, comments? Yes, I mean?
Can you do percentage instead of pixels?
Can we do percentage? That's a good question. And we do, like instead bottom, let's do 50%. Yep. We can do percentage. 10% from the bottom. So that means that this will be this 10% will be 10% from the body then. Oh, but look at that. the body is up until here, but we see that the inner element is overflowing. The inner element is overflowing the body. So actually, let's do 50%. 50% should be easier to verify. Let's do inner. So this is 191 pixels. Let's look at the body. The body is 395. $197. So it seems that that's correct. That will be 50% from relative to the body, right? So half of that will be 197 pixels, and we can see that our inner span is about 191. Close. I'll say close enough. Maybe it's because I'm missing the no. So because I'm missing the decimal places. 195, 200. No, I don't think so. Huh. Maybe it's then the HTML then. Maybe it's not the body. 411, 200 divided by 2. Oh no, that gives a larger number. So I'm not sure exactly what that 50% is of. Well, I guess a way to verify is if we increase the height of the body, would the inner height change? Let's do here. Let's do for the body. I selected the body and I want to change this height to be, let's do like 500 pixels. So we don't see it changing actually. So that 50% is not relative to the body. This we verified, right? Let's look at, wait, I'm doing the math wrong, right? Because I'm looking at the content, but I should be looking is at the space between here and here. That is 50% from the bottom. Who can help me here? Yes, Jan. Go, go. Uh-huh. Okay, so let's look at that. So if I change, I think your thought is if I change this, would it change? So the size is changing, but we can see that the element here, it is positioned 50% from the top. So it turns out that it is then this, no, not even the HTML element, it's like the entire page. Because I think you're right. I think from here, I guess we could measure it.
No,
What's your idea?
no, better way.
Uh-huh.
If you want to check if that is correct, let's make everything 100%.
Make everything 100%. You mean like the body?
Top left, right, bottom.
Oh, that's a good one. So let's try that. Inner Oh, but then, no, you mean 0. Because if I do 100%, then it disappears. But if I do 0%, 0 here. Oh, let's do like 0%. That covered the entire page. So that was a good way to verify. So yes, that percentage will be then, well, actually, that percentage will be, okay, that makes sense. That percentage will be, I don't think it's the body or the HTML, because you can see that the HTML only covers this. But since we saw that fix has something to do with the viewport, with where it's positioned, then this 50% is 50% of the viewport space. And in this case, where we say bottom 50%, we get that's 50% of the viewport. And if we measure it, then we should see that it's actually 50%. That was cool. Thank you all. So let's refresh. Cool. So the last thing that we need to see is the z-index. But also, any questions before we move on to there? Any more discussion? Yes?
So relative is affected by margin border padding, but absolute is not.
So the question is, relative is affected by margin, border, and padding, but fix is not. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know.
So, cool. So let's, how could we try that? So I guess what you're saying is, what if we had fixed, we say top 0, bottom 0, cover the entire screen, left 0, right 0. And then what if we give it a margin? 10 pixels. So the thing is, well, so that, what does that say, or what does that mean? Well, and this is fixed. Would it be any different if we do relative? No. It is different if we do relative. The element will just disappear. Or not disappear, it is there, but we see that there is no background. We only see the text. We can see here, for instance, that the width of the element is 0. So if I have the margin,
Because our elements are 100, since it's 56, it's crossed over a little bit.
oh, that's correct. So since, that's a good point. So our elements are 100 pixels wide, and we're saying margin across all sides be 56 pixels. So that means our margins are going to push the, so let's look at changing it here. I think that will be better. If we do this, we can see it how if as we have a greater margin, the margin is pushing in the content and not leaving any background. So if let's leave it like at 15 pixels. And then could we say left 15? Also, is this space that is being created here anything? No. So does that mean that the margins affect? So what was the original question, Douglas? If the
Well, if margin order having affected anything, I thought that let's see if we have some words.
well, we can say that margin and padding will still apply regardless of the position of the element. They will still apply. If that was maybe your concern, that it would not apply if the position, depending on the position of the element.
Perhaps I think it was if absolute, which of those lines in that represented box is actually going for? The red dotted line around margin, the black line around border, the green line around padding, or the content box.
Wait, say that again.
If it was absolute.
So who is absolute? Inner?
We work with inner. If we use that before to get us, or maybe it was fixed. I'm sorry.
So, but we know that, well, okay, so maybe, let me know if this is correct. So we found out that relative will leave the space where the element will go, right? And fixed and absolute completely remove the element, there's no space is left. With the margin that we give the element, if it's relative, apply to the empty space. So that is, let's do for instance let's do the second one. Second element, let's give it a margin of 10 pixels. So we get that. It's 10 pixels margin all around. And now let's position this relative. And let's move it a little bit down with top 10 pixels. So this is sort of interesting. Turns out that the margin is still applying to the empty space. So even though here, well, I guess that still makes sense because where the space where the element would go is left intact, is preserved, and the space that the element will take is the space that the content needs plus some margins. So those margins are preserved. But if we do position absolute, that just removes completely janks out the element from the page. The margin is still applying. It's just that there is nothing around it to basically separate the element from, if we wanted to do that. I don't know if that sheds some light onto your point. Cool. Any other questions or comments? Cool, so let's look at the z-index. So the z-index is what will allow us to put elements on top of each other if they're overlapping, and dictate the order in which they will appear, basically. Also, I wanted to show you before we do that, I saw this image earlier, CSS position. This one, I think it was a cool sort of infographic. Sure. So that you remember how you can see that fixed is relative to the browser, and when you scroll down, this is what that means basically, that the scrolling down will not affect the position. The element will just be there always. Okay. Cool. So the z-index. Also, I added this image here at the top. So we could think as like top top and bottom, allowing us to place an element in the y-axis, right? That is like closer to the top or closer to the bottom, right? And then right and left will allow us to control the position on the x-axis, right? Closer to the left or closer to the right. And then the z-index, that's why it's called the z-index, because the z-index will allow us to specify the position from that represents whether the element is closer to the user or to an spectator or farther from the user. And especially how when we have other elements, how they overlap and in what order they will overlap. So yes, that's if we imagine sort of like a website as a 3D space or somewhat of a 3D space where we can put stuff in the x, y, and z coordinates. So cool, let's look at that. So let me put back the HTML. Let's put this inner back at the top. Actually, let's just comment this out. We just have 3 boxes. So actually, try this yourself. Give all these pan tags or the outer container class elements. Give them a fixed property, a fixed value for the position property, and make all of them to be top 0, left 0. So to all the outer containers or to all these pans, give a position fixed or relative or absolute, it doesn't really matter. And give them top 0 and left 0. So that will give us the following. Here I'm going to grab them by the inner container class. You could also have used this pan selector, the class name. I'm going to give them, not inner container actually, outer container. I want to make them all position relative. Why not? And then top 0, left 0. Then I saved, and I refresh. Oh, and I got, so actually it does matter. I got the same thing. Why? So I put all the outer container, which is all the spans. I gave them position relative, top 0 and left 0, and I got the same thing which I already had. But the question is why? Or some of you must have received something different depending on what position you picked, right? Pupil? Yes, but more importantly, because they're all starting from the top 0 and left 0, but their position is relative, which is relative to the position where they will normally go. But now what happens if I change that? So I'm going to go here, select that. Here, outer container, the selector. I'm going to change position relative to absolute. I got that because absolute will be relative to the position ancestor, and in case there is no position ancestor, relative to the body. And then we end up with all of them being at the or basically the yellow one is behind the blue one, and the blue one is behind the red one. They get stacked according to the order in which they appear in the HTML. Let me put this back here. So here we can see that the one that is in the HTML at the bottom, visually, it appears at the top, which is the third one. Right? So if the elements are overlapping by default, the last element in the HTML will be at the top. The one before that will be in the middle, and the other one will be all the way at the bottom of the stack. If we imagine this as like stacking papers. So I said at the beginning we can control that, and that is where the z-index comes to play. So it turns out that by default, all these elements have a z-index of 0. And if all the elements have a z-index of 0, then they get stacked, as I said earlier, which is in the HTML order. So let's look at that z-index. Let's go to compute it. Make sure you have the show all. And here I'm going to type z-index. Actually, it says auto. So it's not 0, it's auto. Okay. So we just know that it's auto, and that will make it order as the HTML in the same order or reverse order from the HTML. Now let's control the z-index of the first tag, which is first I'm going to say the z-index property. I'm going to set it to 1. And then what happened? Puts it on top. So the others are automatic. We could just imagine they're 0. The higher the z-index, the closer to the user or the observer the element will be. And then what happens what do you think will happen if, actually, you do this. Set the z-index, I'm going to set it in here. In 1 sec. So I'm going to set the z-index in first, z-index equal to 1. Let's just make sure that we still have the same thing. Oh, but this has to be absolute. And then we see that the first element is at the top. Hugo. The higher the number, the closer it is to the observer, whoever is looking at the page. Or the higher in the stack the element is. So what happens if all the elements are z-index 1? I mean, the normal order still applies because they're all now at the same z-index level. And when they're all the same, then the HTML order applies. So this is useful is if we give different elements different z-indexes, whether we want them. So we could have, for instance, the first element could be in the middle. The last element could be all the way at the bottom. For observing that, we'll need to, we don't want them all in the same place because then that doesn't allow us to see the order. So what I want to do is I want to add some margins so that we can see them overlapping. So I'm going to do margin 10 pixels here on the first one. Let's do 20 pixels on the second one. And let's do on this, the last one is 30 pixels. So I put margins increasing in factor of 10 pixels for each one of them. So I refresh and we get this. So here we can observe a little bit more clearly. Actually, let's do it by double. So this will be Oh, that's already double. Let's just do a triple. No, is that? That will be 90. You know what? I want all of them to be the same. No, but then that's not gonna work.
36.
all of them margin 30 will put them all in the same place. So 3, 6, 9.
Yeah.
Well, I guess this works. Cool. So here, let's just play with it here. Let's look at what happens we have the first one. We don't have any Z index on any of them. We can see that the first one in the HTML will be the one at the bottom of the stack. Now if we play with the Z index on the first one, now we put it 1. Oh wait, is this the first one? Oh, but I have to position it first. Oh, that's another important point. The element must be positioned here. The Z index, just like the top, bottom, left, and right, they don't have any effect if you don't have the element positioned. So here I'll need to position this element for the Z index to take effect. So I'm just going to do that by doing position, absolute or relative. Now the Z index should take effect. Oops. Oh, so I think I do have the Z index on something. So here Z index 1 is the same. Now Z index 2 comes all the way to the top. You didn't need relative? Let's look at in here. So here you have absolute in the outer container.
Yeah. You have Z one right there.
Oh, yeah, this is the one. So let's do that. Z index 1. So okay, so yeah, so if we think about it, all the outer containers we're positioning them relative, right? So they are already that, but if what I mentioned earlier still applies, if we do position, if they're not positioned, then their Z indexes will not apply. The Z index doesn't apply if they're not positioned. Actually, now that I'm just doubting myself, well, let's do this. When in doubt, the Z index property sets the Z order of a position element and its descendants or flex items. Overlapping elements with a larger Z index cover those with a smaller one. So we can see these are some examples too. So let's put the first one, let's put it at the top. Now how could we put, so everyone has this with me here. Now how can we put the second one, which is the blue one, between the yellow one and the red one? I want the blue to be on top of the red, but underneath the yellow. Joanne? Let's do a blue one, Z index of 2. I came all the way to the top. I was close. So we just need to make some other edits. Because now if we think about it, the first one is Z index 1, and the second one is Z index 2. So the larger the Z index, the more at the top the element will be. So what do we need to do? Owen?
Make the first one Z index
Okay, that's one way. Make this one larger than the second one. And then we got it. We have the blue one between the red one. The red one is z-index auto, which will be just 0. The blue one is z-index 2, and the yellow one is the blue one is z-index, wait, I already forgot. The blue one is z-index 2, and the yellow one is z-index 3. Right? And no one is z-index 1. So that's one way. I could just make this, whatever I want at the top, I make it larger. I could also say this one be 2, and the second one be 1. So 2, the first one, the yellow one, z-index 2 is the highest z-index. Then after that, z-index 1 will be sitting between the largest z-index and the one underneath. Yes, John? Z-index auto. On which one should we try that? On the second one? So it does accept auto as a z-index. The problem is that it will, if it's auto, it will just take in the HTML reverse order, which you may or may not want. Like in here, let's put this one back. This one. Let's do it on this one. If we do auto, it just goes all the way to the back. Because then now, the yellow one and the red one are auto, which they're on the same z-index level, and we have, then they will be placed according to the HTML order. And then the blue one will be on top of them all, since has a higher z-index. Questions or comments on the z-index? So this is how you could do, what are some examples for like the use of z-index? Yes, Shana? A card game? Actually, this is a good example. That one just reminded me of this. You see how these cards are like on top? So if we look at them, maybe we'll find something interesting. Got this one. Oh, there you go. Z-index 2. And if we look at the next one, this one, what would the z-index be, higher or lower?
Lower.
Oh, that's it. This one doesn't seem that easy. Let's do computed z-index. Oh, that one is auto. And so maybe it's just a visual effect that only one of them needs to be on top. And then this one, because the HTML order is whatever comes later on. So we can see here, this one is before that one, or this one is after that one. And we know that the regular order in HTML will be the one that comes later be at the top than the one that comes before. So in this case, they don't need to set the z-index at all. They just need to create it in this one to create that illusion that this one is on top of them all. That's cool. Also, that's another very common thing. Like a lot of the stuff that we do here are actually illusions. They look like they are, but yeah, they might not be. Cool. Other questions, comments, thoughts, complaints? I also receive complaints. Cool. So in this 3 minutes that we have, try to replicate this.
That's anything to do with that 404 page on GitHub, the slides, or is that just simply a
Yes, it does have to do something with it. Since oh, 4040. That's still gonna give us a 404. Oh, turns out there's somebody called 440. 4040. Yeah. Oh, this is a bug. We discovered a bug in GitHub. But yeah, this is the spaceship and the cat, the octocat, is on top of this house. But I don't know what you would call that. Even the text will be on top of everything else. Mm-hmm. We could go one more step and try to inspect. Oh, z index is 9. So it seems that maybe there's a few levels in here. The z index of the cat is 9. Oh, look at that. I just lowered it to 8, and then now it's behind the spaceship. Oh. Look at even this. You see the shadow is also an illusion. You see the shadow come. This is pretty cool. Oh. So I'm sorry to take 5 more minutes of your time, but please fill out the exit ticket. I got question one wrong. So if you get the wrong answer, don't worry, we'll regret that. Also, please do these exercises whenever you have time. These are just practice, as much practice as you can get. You don't have to turn anything in. Just do them for practice. These are in the lesson, the lecture notes. All the way at the bottom, there is exercises section. Mm-hmm. Right. So, what's up?
How long have they been in class for?
How long? Like a month and a half. You should have seen me before. I was like, mad sweaty up here. And
Yeah, it's hot as fuck. It is hot as fuck here.
on top of that, just like nervous. Having, looking at these whole bunch of strangers. And
I mean, but you know this. This is like,
that's true. But
I mean, there's no reason to be nervous.
But I feel like I was in, like, now that I know them, like now I feel like, yeah, the fact that like the beginning, like the first week, they were all strangers and all, it's like just freaked out.
Yeah.
But now that I got to know them, I feel more at home.
Did you write the lesson plan?
So I do write. So the lesson material, which is this, was all written. I just complemented a couple of things, and I do like write the lesson. Like my lesson plan is this, where I just like break down like the lesson content. Basically, I break it down into like bullet points as to what I need to talk about, and I just write it like in markdown. So I do have to write like this, which is just, I mean, I guess I wouldn't need to write it, but I still do it just to make sure that I hit all the points that I want.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the lesson is written basically, which is something that I'm really glad I don't have to do, because I think, I don't know if you remember, like but Peter and Lev, like finishing stuff.
They had to like literally do like create
as we went.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So like how fast do you think the pace is? Do you think the pace is pretty fast?
It's pretty fast. I feel like it's pretty fast. I feel I think it's tougher at night. It's tougher at night.
Yeah, because at that point you just want to go home.
Yeah, and then you're tired and you're sleepy.
Yeah. So, like I don't even know how I'm still awake right now. Like I'm gonna need.
What time do you wake up?
I usually wake up at like 6:30.
Well, I have a shirt that's the same brand.
Yeah, actually,
those are really comfortable.
I actually got a folded t-shirt today while I was like running for the bus. It's like a pain. All right,
Have any constructive feedback, or just feedback at all?
Wow, you did good, man. I mean, I don't know if anybody was following it because they didn't understand it.
That's always
yeah.
like, I'm always afraid of that.
Yeah. I mean, come with time, though.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the only thing is like now everything is just coming at you, just like what?
yeah.
But at one point it's gonna go like I don't this.
Yeah.
You go find surgery.
Sure.
Sorry.
Peter. No worries.
This is wrong.
No, that's correct. So I am
There was
wrong.
a mistake. Okay.
Mm-hmm. But everyone is gonna get regraded. Wait, say that again. I didn't hear.
Disculpa que estuve un poquito tarde, but thank you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
None of your problem.
How was the rest of your weekend?
It was good. I feel like the highlight was definitely hanging out with you guys.
Right?
It was definitely a highlight. I didn't do much else. I was just like working on a side project that I have.
Oh, did you
like,
do the thing you said you were gonna do for us? Like to help us?
Wait, what? What
The,
is?
you had like the little exercise that you said it would have been great.
Oh,
It was
yeah,
in
yeah.
JavaScript, but it was in Java and Python.
I haven't done it yet. I actually had I had planned to I had it
I
in my
feel
to
like
do.
this weekend
but
was like a laid back weekend. Like
Yeah.
we needed it so bad.
yeah, but I still have it. I still have it. Like I could even show you.
Sure.
I
Like
think
I'm looking at it right now. Like everything you're doing.
No. Here. This is my to-do list.
Okay.
So it's
Fill the rest. Awesome. Thank you. And it was great talking to you. Getting to know you.
Yeah, it was-
I think I'm going to talk a little bit too much.
I feel like, I think that brings all of us who were there. It brings us together a little bit more, so which is good. Yeah.
And I didn't know you were like our age, so it makes it feel even better.
Really? Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
cool.
That's cool. But take care.
All right. See you.